Monte Cassino, Italy, 18 May 1944. At 10:20 a.m., soldiers of the 12th Podolian Uhlan raised the Polish flag over the shattered Benedictine Abbey. The four-phase battle for Monte Cassino had cost the Allies over 55,000 casualties, including approximately 4,000 from the Polish Second Corps. In the day's supply returns from the gun lines below, one entry was unusual yet official. Private Wojtek carried ammunition crates to gun positions. The notation appeared alongside vehicle numbers, tonnages, and round counts. British and Polish paperwork listed him with a paybook and duty assignment, not for a man, but for a 480-pound Syrian brown bear serving in the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Operational reports recorded that the bearer of crates never dropped a load and followed hand signals under fire. The contrast was stark. A modern mechanized army relying on animal strength. The question followed from the documents themselves. How did a bear acquire a rank, a serial entry, and a battlefield record? Morning heat distorts the horizon as Bedford QL trucks idle beside makeshift tents. On an officer's clipboard, 22nd Artillery Supply Company, Polish Second Corps, the day's order lists fuel draw, tire inspection, and ammunition handling drill. The date is April 1942. The place is Kizil Ribat, Iraq, under British Middle East Command. Formed after the Sikorsky-Maysky Agreement of July 1941, Anders' army gathered evacuees released from Soviet camps. The agreement between the Polish government in exile and the Soviet Union allowed for the formation of a Polish army on Soviet territory. However, operational realities and political tensions led to the evacuation of these forces through Iran. By mid-1942, some 75,000 soldiers, with dependents alongside, moved through Iran and Iraq under British control. The journey from Soviet camps through Persia represented one of the war's lesser-known migrations. Thousands of miles covered by men, women, and children who had survived imprisonment, malnutrition, and disease. Uniform stocks were incomplete. Weapons and vehicles were a patchwork of British and Commonwealth issue. An artillery supply company might move roughly 30 tons per week in ordnance, petrol, and rations, subject to road availability and convoy security rules. The logistical challenge was immense. Outfitting an entire corps with standardized equipment while maintaining operational readiness in a theater already stretched thin by competing demands. London expected a standardized, well-equipped corps ready to join operations in North Africa. British planners anticipated that Polish forces would slot seamlessly into existing command structures, receiving equipment from established supply chains and following doctrine refined through years of desert warfare. Field conditions produced improvisation, traded parts, repainted vehicles, and multi-language paperwork. Men recently malnourished were building to strength in desert camps. Medical officers documented weight gains measured in kilograms per week. Physical training programs adapted to account for recovering prisoners who had lost years to forced labor. Lieutenant General the Ladislaw Anders established command. Staff officers organized transport columns. Anders himself was a veteran of the First World War and the Polish-Soviet War, captured by the Soviets in 1939 and released only after the German invasion of the Soviet Union made Polish allies strategically valuable. His experience shaped the army's structure. Emphasis on mobility, recognition of supply constraints, and understanding that political exile made every soldier irreplaceable. Unit non-commissioned officers maintained discipline and repair schedules under directives from British area headquarters. Bedford QL 3-tonners, Austin K5s, and Canadian military pattern trucks formed the backbone of supply. These vehicles represented three different manufacturing traditions: British utility design, Australian adaptation, and Canadian mass production. Yet all had to function within a single logistical system. Standard loads included 25-pounder shells, small arms ammunition, petrol in 4-gallon tins, and field rations. Each load represented calculated trade-offs: weight against volume, immediate need against reserve stock, mechanical reliability against speed of delivery. Convoy drill followed British doctrine. Speed limits by formation, blackout driving, and spacing to mitigate air attack. Drivers trained on night movement without headlights, navigating by moonlight and memorized routes. Radio silence protocols meant that convoy commanders communicated through prearranged signals, flag positions, light blinks, and vehicle spacing that conveyed meaning to trained observers. Anders later summarized the dilemma. "We were an army without a country, supplied by a power without spare supplies." The phrase describes the structural scarcity that shaped every movement order. Britain's own resources were stretched across North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the home islands. American Lend-Lease equipment was only beginning to arrive in quantities sufficient to meet demand. Every truck allocated to Polish forces represented a truck not available for British units. Every crate of ammunition issued to Anders' Corps came from stocks earmarked for other operations. Shortages forced new routines. Cross-training drivers as fitters, adapting cargo handling, and using manpower for tasks designed for machinery. Mechanics learned to fabricate parts from salvaged materials. Supply sergeants developed informal trading networks with other units, exchanging surplus rations for spare tires or fuel allocations. Officers wrote requisitions in 3 languages, Polish, English, and sometimes Russian, to navigate the bureaucratic maze of a multinational theater. This environment made any added lifting capacity operationally relevant, even from an unconventional source. In a logistics system where every pair of hands mattered, where every kilogram of cargo capacity translated directly to operational capability, units looked for advantages wherever they could be found. Within weeks, a small acquisition during a roadside stop in Iran would become a formal line item in a military unit's strength report. An officer's ledger records petty purchases for the company canteen. The date is 8 April 1942. The place is Hamadan, Iran, a transit corridor to Iraq. At the edge of camp, soldiers encounter Kurdish shepherds offering an orphaned bear cub. A photograph later archived shows hands exchanging tinned food for a 10-kilogram animal. The photograph, preserved in the Polish Institute and Sikorsky Museum in London, captures a moment that would echo through decades. Soldiers kneeling in desert dust, a small bear cradled in military greatcoats. A junior officer, often identified as Lieutenant Anatol Tarnowiecki, notes in a unit diary the receipt of a bear cub. The description includes bottle feeding with condensed milk and early veterinary attention arranged through British medical staff. Tarnowiecki's diary entries, later published in fragmentary form, describe the practical challenges: sourcing appropriate milk, maintaining hygiene in field conditions, and securing the animal during convoy movements. The entries are matter-of-fact, recording the bear alongside vehicle maintenance and personnel assignments. The cub is named Wojtek, a diminutive of Wojciech, a traditional Polish name meaning happy warrior or he who enjoys war. The choice reflects both affection and irony. A name given to children and friends, now applied to an animal that would witness more combat than most soldiers. Soldiers construct a pen from petrol boxes and wire. Feeding schedules and tethering rules appear in company standing orders. The bear acclimates to human presence, following handlers and responding to simple gestures. Mascots were common. Formal work was not. Throughout military history, units adopted animals as symbols and companions. Dogs, goats, even monkeys appeared on regimental rolls. The expectation of a morale symbol shifted as the animal's size and strength increased. What began as an adoption soon had practical implications for handling crates and equipment. By midsummer 1942, the cub weighed 30 kilograms, too large for casual handling, too integrated into company routine to simply release. Sergeants responsible for stores and transport, names appearing in photographs and captions, supervised feeding, hygiene, and restraint protocols. Sergeant Piotr Prendis emerges from the records as the primary handler, though multiple NCOS shared responsibility. British veterinary officers inspected non-standard animals in camps for disease control. Standard procedures required rabies observation, parasite treatment, and quarantine protocols adapted from colonial service in India and Africa. Crate design for artillery shells, wooden with rope handles, allowed 2-man carry. The standard crate measured approximately 60 centimeters by 40 centimeters by 30 centimeters, built from pine planks and secured with steel bands. Soldiers discovered the bear could lift and balance one, under supervision, for short distances. The discovery was accidental. During a training exercise, the bear mimicked soldiers lifting an empty crate, rising on hind legs and clasping the box against its chest. Early tasks remained in safe areas, no live ordnance handling yet. A diary line notes, received infant bear, property of the company, and later, follows column, imitates motion. Accustomed to water from jerrycans, the language is administrative, placing the bear within the same documentation system that tracked vehicles and equipment. Later entries record growth measurements, dietary adjustments, and behavioral observations. The bear learned to recognize whistle signals, to wait at designated feeding times, and to remain calm during engine noise and weapons fire. As Wojtek grew, handlers refined control, halter, leash, and food reward training. The company learned that predictable routine produced predictable behavior, essential for any role beyond morale. Training methods drew on civilian experience. Several soldiers had worked with draft animals in pre-war Poland, and adapted techniques from British Army pack animal doctrine. The bear responded to voice commands in Polish, hand signals, and patterns of reinforcement that shaped behavior through repetition and reward. The turning point would come not from training, but from shipping regulations that forced a binary choice. Leave the bear behind or make him a soldier. British transport policy prohibited animals aboard troop ships except for military working dogs and officers' horses. The regulation reflected practical concerns, space, sanitation, and liability, but offered no exceptions for mascots or informal adoptions. The company faced a deadline. Embarkation orders were issued weeks in advance, and the bear's status had to be resolved before departure. A duty roster on a tent table lists reveille, drill, vehicle checks. The bear moves at the edge of a formation, rising on hind legs as men raise arms for inspection. The date is November 1942. The place is Kizil Ribbit, Iraq. Morning formations now include an unusual participant. A bear that stands approximately 1.5 meters tall, weighing roughly 80 kilograms, positioned at the end of a line of soldiers. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company maintained a mixed fleet, approximately 25 Bedford QL trucks, fuel lorries assigned by brigade. Routine included loading practice, lifting wooden boxes, stacking by code, and securing with webbing straps. Photographs show the animal amid crews during non-hazardous drills. The photographs, taken by unit personnel and occasionally by British Army photographers documenting Allied forces, capture ordinary moments made extraordinary by the presence of a bear. Soldiers smoking cigarettes during breaks, vehicles parked in neat rows, and Wojtek sitting upright like an attentive student. Mascots typically stay outside core tasks. Here, soldiers found the bear could drag tarpaulins, carry empty crates, and haul rope coils. As weight handling increased, handlers instituted safety rules. No live rounds without officer approval. No tasks near engines. Signals limited to hand gestures. The safety protocols reflected military discipline applied to an unprecedented situation. Officers drafted standing orders that specified the bear would not approach loaded weapons, would remain tethered during ammunition movements, and would work only under direct NCO supervision. Sergeant Piotr Prendis and other NCOs appear in memoir notes and captions describing the bear's presence at roll call, water points, and vehicle lines. Prendis, a pre-war regular soldier with service dating to the 1920s, approached the bear's training with the same methodical attention he applied to vehicle maintenance. Mentions include bathing with hose spray and supervised play, useful for desensitization to noise. The bathing routine became a daily ritual. Soldiers would direct water from canvas hoses while the bear stood still, a process that served hygiene and reinforced trust between animal and handlers. Ammunition boxes for the QF 25-pounder each held multiple shells. Training started with empties or inert loads. Standard operating procedures emphasized calm handling and short carries. An empty crate weighed approximately 15 kilograms, enough to provide resistance training without risk of injury. Handlers gradually introduced weight, adding sand-filled bags to simulate loaded ammunition. The bear's carrying capacity proved substantial. By early 1943, it could manage crates weighing 30 kilograms for distances of 50 meters. A diary entry reads, "He stood with the men. He waited for his ration. He followed the truck. Such lines, though brief, anchor the behavior in written record. The diary, maintained by rotating duty officers, recorded the bear alongside equipment status reports and personnel notes. The language deliberately avoids anthropomorphism. The bear is described in operational terms: reliable, predictable, mission-capable. The bear's predictability enabled measured expansion of duties. The company, preparing for overseas movement, recognized the animal as both morale asset and potential porter, if only regulations could be satisfied. Officers debated the practical and legal questions. Could a bear be enlisted? Would British authorities accept such paperwork? What precedents existed for non-human military personnel? British movement orders soon declared a ban. No animals aboard troop transports. The circular arrived in November 1942, distributed to all units scheduled for Mediterranean deployment. The policy was unambiguous. No pets, no mascots, no exceptions beyond authorized categories. Units receiving the order began making arrangements, finding homes for adopted dogs, transferring horses to remount depots, releasing other animals to local populations. The company's response was administrative, not sentimental. Rather than abandon a trained asset, officers proposed a solution that satisfied both regulation and operational need. If the bear could not travel as a mascot, he would travel as a soldier. The proposal required formal paperwork, service entry, assignment to a specific duty, and documentation that placed the bear within military structure rather than outside it. On a desk in the embarkation office lie manifests stamped with unit codes, vehicle serials, and personnel headcounts. A War Office circular prohibits animals on board. The date is December 1943. The place is Alexandria, Egypt, embarkation point for Italy. The office, located in a requisitioned customs warehouse near the docks, processes thousands of personnel records daily. Polish liaison officers work alongside British port authorities, reconciling unit strengths with ship capacities. Polish officers present amended documents. Private Wojtek, 22nd Artillery Supply Company. The listing includes a service entry and assignment to transport. With the bear now a soldier on paper, the ban no longer applies. The paperwork lists service number, date of enlistment, and duty assignment. Ammunition porter, Artillery Supply Company. The form includes spaces for rank, pay grade, and next of kin, fields left blank or marked with dashes, acknowledging the unusual nature of this particular soldier. Regulations expected compliance through removal. The company complied by formalizing the bear as personnel. Ports required names, ranks, and numbers. The file provided them. The logic was bureaucratic rather than absurd. If regulations prohibited animals but permitted soldiers, and if proper documentation established the bear as a soldier, then embarkation must proceed. British authorities, faced with technically correct paperwork, approved the manifest. Polish staff officers liaised with British port authorities. A transport officer annotated the passenger list with special handling notes, kenneling, restraint, feeding schedule, akin to guard dog provisions. The annotation specified: the bear required 20 kilograms of food daily, access to water at 4-hour intervals, and space sufficient for an animal of approximately 1.8 meters in length. Additional notes warned that the bear should not be approached by unauthorized personnel and should remain under Polish supervision throughout the voyage. The troopship's loading plan prioritized vehicles and guns. Personnel were assigned by deck and mess. Wojtek's handlers secured a space for rest, water supply points, and waste control. The voyage routine used whistles and hand signals to avoid confusion in close quarters. Ships carrying the Polish Second Corps to Italy included the Battery, a pre-war Polish liner converted to trooping, and several British transports. Accommodations were crowded. Soldiers slept in hammocks or on deck, queued for meals, and endured the Mediterranean winter in unheated holds. The bear traveled in a makeshift enclosure constructed from cargo netting and timber, positioned near the holds where Polish supply personnel were quartered. Handlers maintained the feeding schedule despite shipboard constraints, drawing rations from their own allocations and supplementing with provisions purchased from ship stores. The bear adapted to the motion of the sea with surprising ease, showing no signs of distress during the multi-day crossing from Egypt to Italy. A movement ledger entry notes an enlisted bear. Later accounts cite a paybook and stamps corresponding to the 22nd Company. The paybook, a standard British Army document issued to all ranks, included a photograph, a small square image showing the bear's face, front on, with the same neutral expression required of human subjects. Service records listed the bear's height, weight, and distinguishing marks, following the format used for personnel identification throughout the British and Commonwealth forces. By solving the regulatory problem with paperwork, the unit preserved a trained, disciplined animal whose lifting ability would soon matter. The solution also signaled to British command that Poles would meet rules precisely, even unusually. The episode became a minor legend within the Corps, an example of both Polish ingenuity and the absurdities of military bureaucracy. Officers joked that Wojtek held the distinction of being the only private who received a full ration without complaint. When the ramp dropped at Taranto in January 1944, the Corps found mountains, winter weather, and a road network that ended long before the gun lines began. The port of Taranto, captured by British forces in September 1943, served as the main entry point for Allied units destined for the Italian front. Offloading operations stretched across weeks. Vehicles driven down ramps, guns lowered by crane, stores stacked on crowded docks. The Polish Second Corps joined a multinational force preparing for the grinding campaign up the Italian peninsula. Offloading in sleet, drivers chain up tires as orders shift units north. Intelligence summaries warn of the Gustav Line's depth and terrain. The date is January 1944. The place is Taranto to the Gustav Line, Italy. The Gustav Line stretched across the Italian peninsula, anchored on the western coast by Monte Cassino and extending east through mountain ranges that favored defense. German engineers had spent months fortifying positions, using natural obstacles and constructed defenses to create interlocking fields of fire. The Polish Second Corps, integrated with the British Eighth Army, fielded multiple divisions, roughly 110,000 personnel, thousands of vehicles, and extensive artillery. Italy's central mountains constrained movement. Mule trains and foot parties became the last mile of logistics. The Corps included the 3rd Carpathian Rifle Division and the 5th Kresowa Infantry Division, both formed from units evacuated through the Soviet Union and Persia. Supporting elements included armored reconnaissance, engineering battalions, and the extensive supply services necessary to sustain operations in mountainous terrain. Pre-deployment models assumed truck delivery to dumps near batteries. Allied logistics doctrine, refined in North Africa, relied on motorized supply chains that moved material from ports to forward dumps with industrial efficiency. In practice, steep tracks, mud, and shelling halted vehicles far to the rear. Every shell that reached a gun required human or animal carry. The mountains of central Italy presented challenges unlike anything encountered in the desert. Roads narrowed to single-lane tracks, gradients exceeded vehicle capabilities, and winter weather turned unpaved routes into impassable mud. Corps commanders and divisional artillery leaders issued daily round allotments, adjusted to enemy fire and weather. Unit diaries describe night carries, camouflage discipline, and timed resupply to coincide with barrages. Artillery planning required calculating not just fire missions but the logistics of moving thousands of shells from rear dumps to gun pits. Fire plans specified rounds per gun per hour, multiplied across batteries and battalions, producing requirements measured in tons. The QF 25-pounder fired 87.6 mm shells. Battery outputs during major fire plans could approach dozens of rounds per gun per hour. Cassino's operations demanded tens of thousands of rounds across phases. Crate weights around 45 to 50 kilograms, or 100 to 110 pounds, define the human load. Each shell weighed approximately 11 kilograms. Crates held 4 shells plus packing material. A standard artillery battery of 8 guns, firing at sustained rates, could expend 800 rounds in a single day, 100 crates requiring delivery across difficult terrain. Eighth Army reports mention critical reliance on mule and hand carriage. Polish unit entries add bear assisting with crates among carrying parties. Unusual yet consistent across anecdotes and photographs. British quartermaster assessments noted that mule capacity, while substantial, remained limited by available animals and fodder supplies. Italian pack mules, requisitioned from local farms, could carry approximately 80 kilograms but required rest, shoeing, and veterinary care. Human porters, organized in carrying parties of 10 to 20 men, moved loads in relay, forward to gun positions, back to dumps for resupply. Mountain logistics made manpower the decisive factor. Any additional lift, including a trained bear, expanded throughput and reduced fatigue on porters, contributing directly to sustained artillery fire. A single additional carrier, working multiple shifts, could move several tons of ammunition over the course of a campaign. Officers calculated efficiency in crate kilometers, the product of weight and distance that measured real logistical output. As the final assault neared, the 22nd Company faced a numbers problem: thousands of crates, narrow paths, and a schedule that allowed no delays. Artillery plans for the May offensive required prepositioning ammunition to sustain multi-day barrages. Supply officers worked backward from fire mission requirements, calculating the carrying capacity needed to build forward stocks before the attack commenced. The math was unforgiving. If carrying parties failed to meet delivery schedules, guns would fall silent at critical moments. A runner delivers a fire plan to an ammunition point. Timings in minutes, rounds per gun, smoke allocations, and counter-battery tasks. The margin carries a handwritten note: ensure continuous supply on Path 3. The date spans February to April 1944. The place is Monte Cassino sector. Path 3 was one of several designated routes connecting rear dumps to forward gun positions, marked on military maps and known to every soldier in the supply chain. Each crate for the 25-pounder weighed roughly 45 to 50 kilograms. Human carry rates on steep tracks under fire were limited by gradient and exposure. Handlers reported the bear carrying individual crates upright, forepaws clasped, guided by short commands and gestures. The technique developed through trial and refinement. Handlers would lift a crate to the bear's chest level. The animal would grasp the handles or the crate body itself, and then proceed forward with handlers walking alongside to provide direction. Commanders expected dumps to keep pace with expenditure. Realistically, fog, shelling, and landslides broke timings. Carrying parties became the pacing element in the entire fire plan. Weather at Cassino alternated between rain, fog, and occasional clear periods that exposed movement to German observation. Enemy artillery targeted known supply routes, forcing carrying parties to move at night or during periods of reduced visibility. Soldiers learned to navigate by memorized landmarks, moving through darkness with loads that tested physical endurance. Officers such as Lieutenant Dmitry Sisko-Bohus appear in accounts noting that the bear did not drop a crate and so coordinated carries with bursts of covering fire. Sisko-Bohus, who survived the war and later published memoirs, described the bear's reliability as a source of unit pride. An animal performing work that exhausted trained soldiers, maintaining discipline under conditions that broke human morale. Ammunition handling followed strict safety rules. Fuses and charges segregated. Live shell crates moved intact to forward pits. Simple, repetitive work sequences, lift, step, pause, deposit, proved ideal for conditioned, supervised animal labor. British ammunition doctrine required that shells remain in sealed crates until immediately before loading, minimizing handling and reducing accident risk. The 22nd Company's procedures adapted this doctrine to mountainous conditions. Crates were broken open only at gun positions, with empty containers returned to dumps for reuse. During the Polish assault of 11 to 18 May, Polish formations suffered heavy losses but sustained artillery fire. The assault plan, codenamed Operation Diadem, involved coordinated attacks by multiple Allied corps along the Gustav Line. Polish forces were assigned the monastery itself, a strategic position that dominated the Liri Valley and had resisted 3 previous Allied offensives. The 22nd Company tallied delivery numbers that met planned rates. Anecdotal notes cite 0 lost crates to mishandling in recorded shifts. Artillery support for the May offensive reached unprecedented intensity. Preliminary bombardments expended thousands of rounds, aimed at suppressing German positions and cutting wire obstacles. Counter-battery fire targeted German guns, attempting to neutralize enemy artillery before the infantry assault. Smoke missions concealed troop movements, while high explosive concentrations blasted strong points. Each mission depended on ammunition arriving at guns on schedule. Delays measured in minutes could mean the difference between supporting fire and unsupported infantry. Unit papers after action. Company fulfilled allocations. Private Wojtek observed in carrying parties' photographs and post-war testimonies corroborate the presence and role. After-action reports, compiled at company and battalion level, provided the documentary foundation for later historical accounts. The reports followed standard formats: personnel status, equipment losses, ammunition expenditure, and narrative summaries of operations. Within these bureaucratic documents, the bear appears as a marginal note, unusual enough to record, routine enough to warrant only brief mention. Sustained artillery supported infantry assaults on fixed positions. Reliable last-mile delivery converted supply tonnage into delivered firepower. By keeping crates moving under pressure, the company helped maintain the tempo needed to breach German defenses. The relationship between logistics and combat effectiveness was direct and measurable. Guns with ammunition fired on schedule. Guns without ammunition fell silent. The Polish success at Cassino, achieved at terrible human cost, validated the arithmetic of supply. Every crate delivered represented shells available for fire missions that suppressed German positions and supported Polish infantry. Recognition followed in the language armies understand, insignia, mentions in orders, and an enduring emblem. Military tradition honors service through symbols. Badges, citations, unit histories. The 22nd Company's story, and the Bear's role within it, became part of the Polish 2nd Corps' institutional memory. Paint tins open beside a vehicle line. A new badge appears on cabs and door panels. A bear carrying an artillery shell. The date is June 1944. The place is Ancona, Italy. The design was simple, almost crude by peacetime standards. A bear in profile, upright, a shell clasped in its forepaws. Unit artists painted the emblem by hand, adapting the image to fit vehicle doors, equipment crates, and unit signage. The Polish 2nd Corps' success at Cassino came with human cost. About 923 dead and 2,931 wounded for the Polish contingent. Yet, for the first time in months, the narrative within the Corps featured accomplishment rather than displacement. Polish casualties in Italy, when added to losses from the 1939 campaign and years of Soviet imprisonment, represented a generation's sacrifice. Every regiment carried the names of battles fought across multiple continents. Every soldier understood that service in exile might mean never returning home. Allied command highlighted Cassino as a multinational achievement. Polish troops understood that political outcomes offered no return home. The government in exile in London lacked recognition in the East. Polish territories faced altered borders. At the Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, the Allied powers agreed to post-war borders that placed eastern Poland under Soviet control. For soldiers of the 2nd Corps, many of whom hailed from territories now assigned to the Soviet Union, the political settlement meant that military victory would not restore their homeland. Company artists and sign painters adapted the emblem from sketches. Corps leadership allowed the symbol on vehicles and stationery, embedding the story within official visual identity. The emblem served multiple functions: unit identification on crowded roads, morale symbol during difficult campaigns, and visual narrative of an unusual chapter in military history. Soldiers painted the bear on personal equipment, vehicle bumpers, and even ammunition crates, marking supplies with the symbol of the animal that had helped deliver them. The British Army Film and Photographic Unit documented Polish movements, spreading images through Allied newsreels. The emblem functioned as instant recognition on crowded roads and at dumps. British cameramen, filming the aftermath of Cassino, captured footage of Polish vehicles marked with the bear emblem. These images appeared in newsreels shown in London cinemas, introducing British audiences to the Polish contribution and the unusual story of the enlisted bear. A Polish bulletin references the emblem's adoption, in honor of service rendered in ammunition supply at Cassino. The wording anchored tradition to a specific operation. Military heraldry follows precise protocols. Emblems must relate to unit history, receive official approval, and maintain consistency across all applications. The bear emblem met these requirements, documenting a factual achievement while creating a memorable visual identity. Symbols consolidate memory. The emblem promoted cohesion in a force of displaced soldiers and ensured that the logistical role, often invisible, received concrete acknowledgement. In military organizations, combat units often receive recognition while support elements work in obscurity. The bear emblem elevated supply work to symbolic importance, acknowledging that victory depended as much on delivered ammunition as on tactical skill. As Allied armies pivoted to the final offensive in Italy, the bear emblem traveled north, accompanying convoys that would take Bologna. The summer and fall of 1944 saw Polish forces advancing up the Adriatic coast, fighting through river crossings and defensive lines as German forces withdrew toward the Gothic Line and eventually the Po Valley. Supply columns followed the advance, maintaining the flow of ammunition, fuel, and rations that sustained operations across hundreds of kilometers. Maps spread on a bonnet show phase lines and supply axes. Drivers check spare tires. A quartermaster counts crates by lot number. The date spans March to April 1945. The place is Adriatic sector to Bologna, Italy. By spring 1945, Allied forces had breached the Gothic Line and prepared for the final offensive that would break German resistance in northern Italy. Weekly convoy figures reached roughly 100 tons of ammunition, varying by phase of the offensive. Austin K5s and Canadian military pattern trucks consumed around 40 liters of petrol per 100 kilometers under load in hilly terrain. Maintenance logs note brake relinings and clutch replacements after steep descents. The logistics of the final offensive required sustaining multiple divisions in continuous operations. Ammunition for artillery and small arms, fuel for vehicles and generators, rations for soldiers, and medical supplies for casualty clearing stations. Commanders planned for clear roads behind a rolling offensive. Reality delivered blown bridges, detours, and traffic jams of multinational forces. The last mile still depended on carry parties, though terrain near Bologna eased compared with Cassino's cliffs. German demolitions targeted bridges, railway lines, and road junctions, forcing Allied engineers to construct temporary spans and detours. Convoys competed for road space with advancing combat units, refugee columns, and retreating German forces. Quartermaster notes from April 1945 list the bear attached to columns. Morale excellent veterans later recalled the animal's calm in noise and crowds, an outcome of years of desensitization. By the war's final months, the bear had been under military routine for 3 years, longer than many soldiers had served. The animal's presence provided continuity through campaigns, a living reminder of the company's journey from Iraq to Italy. Artillery supported river crossings and urban fights at the approaches to Bologna. Reliable ammunition flow enabled planned barrages and immediate fire missions. The crossing of the Sinio River in April 1945 required concentrated artillery support, preparatory bombardments to suppress defensive positions, smoke screens to conceal assault boats, and on-call fire to respond to German counterattacks. Polish artillery, supplied by the 22nd Company and other logistics units, maintained fire schedules that allowed infantry to establish bridgeheads and expand them into breakout positions. After-action summaries credit supply units for timely delivery that allowed synchronized fire support. Mentions of the bear persisted as marginal notes, unusual but consistent. Unit commanders writing final reports for the Italian campaign included acknowledgments of support personnel whose work enabled combat success. The bear appears in these documents as a factual curiosity, a detail that distinguished one unit's story from the general narrative of supply operations. Cumulative logistics generate operational momentum. By keeping rounds flowing, the 22nd Company ensured guns could answer commanders' requests within minutes, not hours. The relationship between supply efficiency and tactical responsiveness was direct. Artillery officers could plan aggressive fire schedules knowing that ammunition would be available when needed. This confidence, built on reliable delivery over months of operations, allowed commanders to concentrate firepower at decisive points rather than conserve ammunition for uncertain future needs. The war's end would dissolve the Corps. Service records would be closed. The question became, what was to be done with a demobilizing bear? German forces in Italy surrendered on 2 May 1945. Allied units transitioned from combat operations to occupation duties, garrison routines, and eventually demobilization. For the Polish Second Corps, victory brought political complications. Returning to a Poland under Soviet influence was unacceptable to many soldiers, while remaining in exile meant uncertain futures in foreign lands. A field telephone buzzes in a forward HQ as reports confirm the Abbey crest is reached. Outside, the smoke clears to show a flag visible for miles. The date is 18 May 1944. The place is Monte Cassino, Italy. The flag, white and red, the colors of Poland, flew from the ruins of the monastery that had dominated the battlefield for months. Cassino opened the Liri Valley, clearing the path toward Rome. The operation demonstrated that sustained multinational pressure and artillery could pry apart a fortified line even after previous failures. 3 previous Allied offensives had failed to take Cassino. In January, February, and March 1944, American, British, New Zealand, and Indian forces had attacked the position without success. The fourth battle, launched in May with Polish forces assigned the monastery, succeeded through combination of overwhelming firepower, tactical adaptation, and determination to accept casualties necessary to achieve the objective. German command expected the Gustav Line to hold longer. Allied command knew success depended on supply endurance as much as tactics. The Polish assault validated the arithmetic. If ammunition arrived, attacks progressed. German defensive planning relied on the assumption that Allied logistics could not sustain multi-week offensives at high intensity. The calculation proved incorrect. Allied supply systems, drawing on port capacity at Naples and Taranto and supported by extensive motor transport, maintained delivery rates that sustained artillery fire through weeks of combat. Polish battalion and company commanders report positions captured. Artillery officers' log expenditures met as scheduled. The 22nd Company appears in logs as meeting deliveries under fire. Battalion war diaries, maintained according to British Army protocol, recorded hourly positions, casualties, and ammunition states. Artillery logs tracked rounds fired by gun, by battery, and by battalion, data that allowed post-war analysts to reconstruct the battle's tempo and intensity. A Polish General Staff bulletin notes the supply company's performance and records the presence of the enlisted bear in carrying parties. The bulletin, circulated within the Corps, provided official recognition of units whose work enabled the victory. For logistics personnel, often operating miles behind the front line, such mentions represented rare acknowledgement of their contribution. By closing the logistic loop, the unit translated depot inventories into delivered combat power. This link, crates to barrels to targets, defined the outcome. Military theorists distinguish between potential and actual combat power. Potential exists in stockpiled resources. Actual power manifests when those resources reach combat units at the decisive moment. The 22nd Company's achievement lay in maintaining this flow under conditions designed to disrupt it. Unit orders soon recorded a promotion for the bear, a symbolic act that captured an entire corps' sense of identity. The promotion, from private to corporal, followed military protocol. Commendation by immediate superiors, approval by company command, and notation in service records. The act blended bureaucratic formality with symbolic gesture, honoring service through the same mechanisms that recognized human soldiers. The promotion ceremony, held in June 1944, included elements familiar from military tradition: formation of the company, reading of orders, and symbolic presentation. Photographs show the bear standing before assembled soldiers, handlers at attention, officers saluting. The ceremony acknowledged what records had already documented: years of service under combat conditions, reliable performance of assigned duties, and contribution to unit effectiveness. Demobilization papers stack high on trestle tables. A lorry marked Polish Second Corps pulls into a British camp in the borders. The date spans 1945 to 1946. The place is Winfield Camp, Berwickshire, Scotland. The camp, established to receive Polish forces withdrawing from Italy, processed thousands of soldiers facing uncertain futures. Disbandment procedures listed personnel transfers, resettlement options, and equipment returns. The bear's paperwork designated Edinburgh Zoo as the receiving institution, with notations about military origin. British resettlement policy offered Polish soldiers several options: return to Poland, now under communist government, emigration to Commonwealth nations, or settlement in Britain under the Polish Resettlement Act of 1947. Many chose to remain in Britain, forming communities that preserved Polish language, culture, and military traditions. Soldiers expected to return to a liberated homeland. Post-war borders and politics denied that outcome for many. The Corps dispersed into British civilian life. Some emigrated. Few returned east. The Yalta Conference and subsequent political developments placed Poland firmly within the Soviet sphere of influence. For soldiers of the Second Corps, particularly those from eastern territories annexed by the Soviet Union, return meant accepting communist rule and potential persecution for having served in Western-aligned forces. British liaison officers supervised the transfer. Polish NSOS performed final checks. Veterans later recalled escorting the bear to the zoo, saluting at the gate. The transfer, conducted in November 1947, followed protocols established for decommissioning military animals. Veterinary inspection, transport arrangements, and custody transfer to civilian authorities. Handlers who had worked with the bear for 5 years delivered him to zoo staff with detailed notes on feeding, behavior, and health history. Tens of thousands of Polish servicemen settled in the UK under resettlement schemes. The bear became part of the public memory of their service, a living museum piece with a service file. Polish communities in Scotland, particularly around Edinburgh, maintained connections to the zoo. Veterans organized regular visits, bringing families to see the animal whose story embodied their own experiences of displacement, service, and adaptation to life in exile. Press clippings identified Wojtek, Polish soldier bear, and noted his habits: fondness for showers, beer given as treats, and interaction with visiting veterans. British newspapers, discovering the story, published features that introduced wider audiences to the unusual history. The articles emphasized both the bear's military service and the broader story of Polish forces in the war. Soldiers who had fought from the Middle East through Italy, only to find themselves unable to return home. The transfer transformed a military asset into a public symbol. What administration had created for a voyage now preserved a story across decades. Military service creates documentation, personnel files, unit records, operational reports. This paperwork, initially generated for bureaucratic necessity, became the foundation for historical memory. The bear's service file, complete with enlistment papers, promotion orders, and discharge documentation, proved the story's authenticity against inevitable skepticism. Behind the railings, the soldier's life continued on display, but the military identity did not vanish. It was read aloud by former comrades to their children. Zoo visits became pilgrimages for Polish veterans, opportunities to maintain connections to shared history. Fathers brought sons, explaining in Polish and English the story of a bear who had carried shells at Cassino, who had been enlisted to satisfy regulations, who represented in animal form the exile and service that defined an entire generation. A brass plaque reads Wojtek. Crowds watch as an attendant hoses down the enclosure. Veterans in berets stand a few paces back, hands in pockets. The date spans 1947 to 1963. The place is Edinburgh, Scotland. The enclosure, purpose-built for the bear, provided space adequate for an animal weighing over 200 kilograms, larger than typical zoo facilities for brown bears. Zoo records and local press report frequent visits by Polish veterans who tossed cigarettes and spoke to the bear. He crushed rather than smoked them, a behavior remembered in interviews. The cigarette ritual became famous. Veterans would throw cigarettes into the enclosure. The bear would pick them up, place them in his mouth, and crush them, mimicking smoking without actually lighting or consuming them. Witnesses recalled that the bear seemed to recognize Polish speech, showing heightened interest when addressed in that language. At maturity, the bear weighed about 250 kilograms, or about 550 pounds. He lived approximately 21 years, above the typical captive average for the subspecies. Feeding schedules, veterinary notes, and public hours appear in institutional records. Syrian brown bears, smaller than European or North American species, typically live 15 to 18 years in captivity. Wojtek's longevity reflected consistent care, veterinary attention, and perhaps the routine established during military service. One might expect the story to fade after demobilization. Instead, the records kept the narrative alive. A paybook preserved, photographs displayed. School children told that one Edinburgh resident had a rank. Edinburgh Zoo, recognizing the bear's historical significance, maintained displays that explained his military background. Educational programs included his story in broader narratives about animals in warfare, Polish contributions to Allied victory, and the realities of displacement and exile. A curator's note described him as formerly of the Polish Army, a line that situates a zoo animal within military history. The zoo's archives preserved documentation, military paperwork, photographs from Italy, letters from veterans, and press clippings spanning 2 decades. These materials formed a collection that transcended typical zoo records, creating instead a military archive housed within a civilian institution. The persistence of documents and commemorations ensured continuity between wartime service and peacetime remembrance, anchoring an unusual case in institutional memory. Military history depends on documentation. Without written records, oral histories, and physical artifacts, events fade into myth or disappear entirely. The bear's story survived because administrators in Iraq, Egypt, and Italy had followed protocols, creating paperwork that proved his service. Memorials in later decades would fix the story in bronze and stone, guaranteeing that the service of an exile army, and its most unlikely private, would not be erased. The bear died on 2 December 1963. Obituaries appeared in British and Polish newspapers, noting not just the passing of a zoo animal but the death of a veteran, perhaps the last survivor of certain units, certainly among the most unusual service members of the Second World War. Veterans who attended the informal memorial service at the zoo recalled a ceremony that blended military tradition with personal grief. Former handlers, now elderly men with families in Scotland, stood in their old berets and blazers, rendering salutes to an animal that had shared years of hardship and displacement. The moment captured the intersection of human and animal experience, showing how military service creates bonds that transcend conventional categories. A file marked obituary rests beside condolence letters after 2 December 1963. Decades later, a crowd assembles in Prince's Street Gardens for the unveiling of a statue depicting a soldier and a bear with an artillery shell. The date spans 1963 to 2015. The place is Edinburgh, Krakow, and other memorial sites. The statue, unveiled in November 2015, brought the story full circle, from wartime service to post-war exile to permanent commemoration in bronze. Commemorative plaques appeared in the UK and Poland. The 2015 Edinburgh statue by David Harding and Alan Ariot codified the narrative in public art. Veterans associations and city authorities described the monument as symbolizing Polish-Scottish wartime friendship and the contribution of the Polish Second Corps. The sculpture depicts a soldier and bear in friendly embrace, the bear holding an artillery shell, an image drawn directly from the unit emblem and wartime photographs. Funding for the memorial came from public subscription, with contributions from Polish communities in Scotland, British veterans organizations, and individuals moved by the story. The campaign, organized by the Scottish-Polish Heritage Association and supported by Edinburgh City Council, raised funds through events that introduced new generations to the history. School groups, military veterans, and history enthusiasts contributed to a memorial that would ensure the story's preservation. Mascot stories are often treated as legend. Here, administrative traces, paybook, manifests, unit orders, and photographs elevated the tale from anecdote to documented history. Historians researching the Memorial Commission examined archives in Britain, Poland, and Russia, verifying details that might otherwise seem incredible. The documentation proved comprehensive. Service records matched photographs, unit diaries corroborated memoirs, and official reports confirmed the bear's role in supply operations. Ceremonial speeches noted verified service records and the emblem of the 22nd Company, a bear carrying a shell, reproduced on banners and programs. The unveiling ceremony, attended by dignitaries including the Polish ambassador to the United Kingdom and Edinburgh's Lord Provost, included military honors, color guard, buglers, and wreathlaying. Polish and British veterans, some in wheelchairs, some walking with canes, stood as witnesses to history being transformed into permanent commemoration. Material culture, badges, statues, and archives, consolidates institutional memory. Public recognition preserves operational details, ammunition types, unit designations, dates, that otherwise vanish from general knowledge. Memorials serve multiple functions: honoring service, educating subsequent generations, and maintaining cultural connections. The Wojtek statue performs all three, reminding visitors that history includes unexpected elements that reveal larger truths about displacement, service, and survival. The emblem still surfaces in modern Polish military commemorations, a signal that a wartime logistical story continues to frame unit identity. Contemporary Polish army units tracing lineage to the Second Corps incorporate the bear emblem in unit insignia, maintaining visual continuity with wartime predecessors. The 22nd Transport Regiment, successor to wartime supply companies, includes Wojtek in its official history and displays his image in unit facilities. Additional memorials appeared in Poland: a statue in Krakow, plaques in Warsaw, and museum displays in military history collections. These commemorations serve Polish audiences differently than British ones, emphasizing not just the bear's story but the broader narrative of Polish forces in exile. Soldiers who fought across multiple continents, who could not return home after victory, who preserved military traditions through decades of communist rule that denied their service. A comparative table lies open: columns for terrain, transport mode, crate weight, carry distance, and round expenditure. A second sheet lists personalia: name, unit, assignment. This is an analytical summary covering 1942 to 1963. Archives in London, Warsaw, Edinburgh. The table, compiled by military historians examining logistics in the Italian campaign, treats the bear as one data point within larger analyses of supply effectiveness. Last-mile delivery in mountains often reduces to human or animal carry. At Cassino, hand and mule transport predominated. A 25-pounder crate at roughly 45 to 50 kilograms defines labor capacity per trip. Conditioned animal carry, under supervision, offered non-trivial throughput during peak demand. Historical analysis of mountain warfare consistently identifies logistics as the limiting factor in sustained operations. The terrain that provides defensive advantage also constrains supply lines, forcing armies to rely on methods unchanged since ancient times: animals and men carrying loads on their backs. Daily totals for the May assault reached many thousands of shells. Unit notes recorded that the bear carried crates in multiple shifts without recorded drops. Quantitative analysis suggests the bear's contribution, while modest in absolute terms compared to entire company output, was significant at the margin. If the bear moved even 20 crates per day during intensive operations, a conservative estimate given documented carrying capacity and work patterns, this represented roughly 1 ton of ammunition delivered over distances that exhausted human porters. Administrative evidence, service entry, paybook annotations, movement manifests, grounds the narrative in primary sources rather than hearsay. Historians distinguish between legend and documented fact through careful source evaluation. The bear's story survives scrutiny because it generated paperwork, official documents created by military bureaucracy for administrative purposes, without anticipation of future historical interest. These documents, preserved in multiple archives, corroborate oral histories and photographs. A veteran's memoir summarized the essence. He carried what men carried. The line reads as observation, not embellishment. Memoirs published decades after the war repeat this phrase or variations. The bear performed work equivalent to soldiers, followed orders, and maintained discipline under combat conditions. The consistency of accounts, from multiple sources recorded independently over decades, supports factual accuracy. The case illustrates how armies adapt logistics to terrain and constraints. Formal enlistment as a workaround, training to integrate non-standard assets, symbolism to bind an exile force. Military organizations face constant pressure to adapt doctrine to circumstances. The Polish Second Corps, operating with limited resources in challenging terrain, exemplified improvisation within disciplined structures. The bear's enlistment represented creative problem-solving that satisfied regulations while preserving operational capability. Tactical artillery effect at Cassino depended on a chain that included an enlisted animal, a fact visible only in paperwork and recollection, yet consequential at the scale of a core operation. Modern military theory emphasizes logistics as the foundation of combat power. The bear's story, while unusual in its particulars, illustrates universal principles. Reliable supply enables sustained operations. Attention to detail in logistics yields tactical advantages. And every element of the supply chain, however unconventional, contributes to final outcomes. Amid millions of service files from the Second World War, one paybook bears the entry of a Syrian brown bear, a soldier by regulation, a porter by function, and a documented contributor to the Allied victory in Italy. The statement is factually accurate and historically significant. It captures the intersection of bureaucracy and necessity, humor and tragedy, individual quirk and collective memory. The bear's service demonstrates that war, for all its horror and scale, contains human elements, acts of compassion, moments of absurdity, and stories that transcend their immediate military context to reveal deeper truths about displacement, service, and the bonds formed under extreme circumstances. The story endures not because it is unique. Many units adopted mascots. Many soldiers formed bonds with animals, but because it was documented with unusual thoroughness and preserved through institutional memory maintained across decades. What began as an administrative solution to a shipping problem became an emblem of an exiled army, a symbol of Polish-Scottish friendship, and eventually a permanent part of military history preserved in archives, memorials, and collective memory.